One of the amazing things to think about relative to Jesus around Christmas time is that he fulfilled dozens of Old Testament prophecies. Now, I know when you bring up the Old Testament prophets, you can think of things that we're skeptical about, like fortune tellers. Like, is it like that? But it's not. I mean, fortune tellers are very different. Fortune tellers are, they're pretty vague in what they say. They're usually talking about the very near future. They're usually using some tricks, frankly, and they're also self-interested. They're getting something out of it, right? They're being mysterious. They're getting you to pay money for it. The Old Testament prophets are very different from that, right? They are very specific. They are talking about the distant future. They aren't using any tricks. They're just saying what God told them. And you can tell that because they're not getting anything out of it. In fact, most of them got killed for being prophets. Now, some people have said, well, the fact that there are very specific prophecies about Jesus from hundreds of years before he was born, that has to be an inside job. Like, somebody must have written those into the prophets after Jesus was born so that it would look like Jesus was prophesied about long before his birth. Except that's really not possible to believe anymore. But in the 1950s, there was a discovery called Discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the deserts in Israel. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were a bunch of different scrolls or ancient books found. And there were, among the different books that were found, were the Old Testament prophets. And these manuscripts were before the birth of Jesus, quite a significant time. And so it showed with conclusive evidence that the prophets as they are today in our Bibles is virtually identical to what they were in the time before Jesus. And there's no reason to believe that they had changed between then and when the prophets originally wrote them. So the prophets said what they said hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born. Now, some people have said, okay, wait, but if Jesus read the prophets and he knew their predictions, he could fulfill some of those himself, right? Couldn't he have just done the things the prophets said and then he'd look like the Messiah because he did all the things? It's plausible in a way, but the problem with it is Jesus fulfills so many Old Testament prophecies. A significant number of them are things he didn't have any control over. For example, it was prophesied in these prophets the line Jesus would be born in, that he would be a son of Abraham and of Judah and of King David. He couldn't control that. In the book of Micah, it's prophesied the very town he'd be born in, the town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem wasn't Joseph and Mary's hometown, and it was a long distance from where they lived, and it was a sparsely populated town. If you were going to guess the town the Messiah would be born in, you'd pick something like Jerusalem or something like more historically important, like Hebron, right? But Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Additionally, it says that Jesus would be born poor, that he would go in flight as a refugee to Egypt long before he had any control over it. And there's a number of other prophecies like that are specific things about Jesus. For example, that his mother would be a young woman and a virgin, that he would be her firstborn son. And obviously, if he was born in the line of David, he would be Jewish. If you take all these circumstantial things that Jesus had no control over, and you add up the probability that he would fulfill all of them, though he had no ability to affect any of it, the odds against him fulfilling these prophecies is pretty astronomical. It could lead one to believe that that could only be orchestrated by God. But then you might ask, well, why? Who cares? Why would God prophesy all these like incidental things about Jesus' life that don't seem to matter all that much, like the town he's born in? And the answer to that question, I think, is if God prophesies things that we can verify, that we can know by the details of history they actually happened, maybe we'll believe the other prophecies Jesus fulfilled that are about what Jesus' death and resurrection and life means for us today. So, for example, it says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, that the Messiah would die for our transgressions, that by his wounds and under the punishment of his own death, we would be healed. That he would purchase for us the forgiveness of God if we would put our trust in God. In Isaiah 55, it says that anybody who is a sinner, who's like lost and broken by sin and given over to things that the Bible calls wicked, that if we would turn to God, that he would freely pardon us because of this Messiah, right? In chapter 54 in the book of Isaiah, it says that God would create a new nation of adopted children. That would be this thing that we later learn is called the church of people that he'd redeemed and made into a new family to follow him and tell the world about it. In the book of Joel, it says that in the days of the Messiah, God would pour out his Spirit on all flesh, that is, all people who would turn to the Messiah and believe in him, and that God's Spirit would work in us incredible things. In the book of Ezekiel, it says that through the work of the Messiah, that God would take the heart of stone in us, our hardened willfulness, the part of us that doesn't want to serve God, would be open to his love and changed by his gracious generosity, that he would take out that stone, that heart of stone, and give us a heart of flesh, one that is open to what is good and believes in the truth and that loves what is beautiful and right. And that all of these things and many more, that we would be with Christ when he returns, and that we would escape judgment, and that we would be his forever in what we call heaven in the kingdom and city of God, that all of these things are part of the heritage of what this Messiah, Jesus, brought about. And that's why he's so amazing. It's why we can see him as that amazing at Christmas time, and it's why the Old Testament prophets are incredibly relevant to that. Now, if Jesus isn't a big deal in your life, if you haven't come to believe in him as your Savior and as your Lord and as the one who leads you spiritually, as God, you're already on the I Found Peace website. Why not poke around, learn a little bit more, watch some more videos, and see if you can discover the more that is true about Jesus and what that means for you.